Welcome everyone to a new Fireside, and I'm so honored today to be here with Lise Noble, who is the UX UI Distinguished Engineer at Discover Financial, and we're here to talk about rethinking accessibility. And I feel like this is such an important topic. We're going to deep dive into why it's an important topic in just a minute or two. We're going to talk about, why Lise sees accessibility as such an important topic, how we can bake that in from the beginning of our projects, why that's an important idea. Also, this amazing thing coming, open source project coming from Discover Financial, the accessibility theme builder. We're going to discuss that and how people can get involved. So be sure to stick around until the end so you can learn all those points and specifically how to get involved in the accessibility theme builder. So let's get started. Welcome back. We're here with our Fireside to talk about rethinking accessibility. So Lise, I just wanted to start off by doing a little introduction. Tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe where you work and maybe something interesting about you if you don't mind sharing something personal or otherwise or work related.
Absolutely. Well, my name is Lise Noble. It is spelled Lise. I also go by Lise. I prefer not to be called Lice, but it happens. I am a distinguished UX, UI engineer and designer at Discover Financial Services. And for those who don't know, UX and UI are complementary.
I am curious about the difference between the two of those.
Yeah, absolutely. So UX refers to user experience. And we all have hundreds of user experiences every day, checking into a hotel, grabbing a cup of coffee, maybe ordering an Uber. And more of those experiences are becoming digital, but they don't have to be digital. You can work with UX to define processes and procedures. They don't always have an interface. Now, UI stands for interface. And when there is an interface, the UI is a very big part of creating an excellent user experience. But so just wanted to distinguish the difference between the two.
That seems clear to me. So something interesting about you.
Yeah, let's see. I am Norwegian. I am not actually American. I have lived here in the country of the United States for over 40 years, but my hometown is 280 miles north of the Arctic Circle.
Wow, you have like no accent. That's
I don't. Even my father, who came to the States when he was, in his 40s, doesn't have much of an accent. Norwegians tend to be very good with the English language.
awesome. And for anyone that's just checking in, I'm Cody Zuschlag, developer relations engineer at Nearform, and I love talking about anything to do with tech, especially around open source and community. And I thought it'd just be really awesome to have Lise, sorry, get careful what you said, right? To talk about accessibility because I know Discover, which is your employer, we could talk about that in just a second, has been doing some really exciting things around accessibility. So I guess the first question before we get to maybe that, thinking about user experience, how can we relate user experience and accessibility? Like there must be a link there, right? That's why we're here. So can you explore that a little bit?
Yeah. So when you're creating a user experience, you should be really thinking inclusively, right? You should be trying to create great experiences for everyone. So when UX and accessibility isn't hand in hand, that's when we are creating problems. And more companies are actually obligated by some federal law that says that they need to make user experiences accessible, not only for customers, but also for employees. So it's becoming, companies are starting to understand the impact that it has to their bottom line, as well as the need to just do it for the right reasons.
Yeah, love that. That seems so important. So, as I hinted just a second ago, what is Discover doing around the accessibility space? So like, what's your vision? What's your goal? What's your purpose at Discover?
Yeah, thanks, Cody. Great question. Well, Discover is going through the middle of a digital transformation. So, it's really an exciting time for Discover. And part of that digital transformation is identifying best best practices in regards to creating exceptional products for our customers. And there really is a customer-centric a focus and approach that Discover is really embracing. And so with that is the need of creating exceptional experiences. And as I mentioned, that's hand in hand with creating accessible experiences. Discover has a really great track record of being a very inclusive company in terms of their policies and their procedures. So it just makes sense that we extend that into our products and our experiences.
That makes a lot of sense to go dive deep. I love that because it feels, I don't know, I guess maybe this is the cliche, but we talking about developers and people in the tech industry, sometimes we leave behind the accessibility issue. Maybe we're not always being inclusive. It feels like there's a lot of work to do around that. So if you were going to start a project and we're going to keep accessibility first, like how do you build that in from the beginning?
Well, it's first of all, it's really important for you to understand who your customer base, what they're trying to do, and is there like what sort of accessibility barriers may your product, introduce, and how can you navigate those, right? Um, and so I think that's one of the first things. I also think it's really helpful to identify, accessibility as a priority in your product and sort of identifying your specs for your product up front. Oftentimes, accessibility is an afterthought. It's sort of like putting lips on a pig. But if you think about it up front, you can actually save yourself a lot of time. Yeah, so there's a lot that you can do if you identify that objective up front. You can move much more swiftly and make sure that it's in consideration in the user experience as well as in the UI.
I love that, and I can only think of all the projects, so many of the projects I've worked on where it becomes this like afterthought, and then we're trying to fill in for this work. We have this huge technical debt around accessibility, and it's like all those things. We got to think about that from the beginning. Oh, that starting off thinking about hard, not necessarily hard, but the really important 20% of those non-functional requirements that maybe as tech folks we kind of push aside to think about those from the beginning.
I love that you brought that up, Cody, because, lots of times as UX and UI designers, when we create a product and then it gets implemented, if we as designers identify disparities between what we designed and what's delivered, what we're told is to document the issues that we see. If you're in a more, sophisticated company, you're creating Git issues or Jira tickets or something to identify those issues. But what often happens is those get tagged with, cosmetic or not non-critical, and so they tend to get pushed to the backlog, right? And so what happens is the user interface that was intended falls farther and farther apart from how it's implemented. And then accessibility is often the thing that gets hit, right? And then it's getting deprioritized and it gets pushed farther and farther back in the backlog.
Yeah, it's just this thing we have to think about from the beginning and prioritize from the beginning if we want to have a good experience, and it's going to save resources in the end, right? If you bake that in from day one.
Yep. And a misconception that people often have is that, oh, if we have to make it accessible, we're sort of diminishing the experience for everyone. But it's actually the opposite. When you think about usability and you bring usability testing and you create experiences that are usable, that have usability built into them, you're actually elevating the experience for everyone because things become more consistent. There's heavier, more increased contrast, which makes things more consumable. There's a little bit more white space, things like that. So it actually benefits everybody.
Love that. I love thinking about that. And yeah, maybe we just need more like awareness around that issue, right? Because I know there's somebody close to me who has some vision challenges, and just in day-to-day interactions, like I'll forget that, and to have that awareness and to think about that when we're building things, right? You're just creating it better for everybody at the end of the day. And bringing in, I mean, if you think about from a business perspective, you're bringing in more customers and potential customers too, right?
Yeah, well, it's great for customers. It's great for brands, like for brand respect and awareness. When people see that brands have prioritized this, it makes that brand more appealing because we're we're as a people, we appreciate inclusivity, right? So it's nice to see that represented and prioritized by brands. The other thing that you mentioned there that I think is really important is a lot of people aren't aware of the different type of accessibility needs that can be solved with digital design, right? So there's obviously visual and audio design accessibility needs that people think about. There's mobility needs, but there's also cognitive needs. So there's over 1 billion people in the world who have accessibility needs, and the biggest bucket that people fall into are actually the cognitive disabilities. So people who have ADHD or dyslexia or motion sensitivity and things like this are a lot of the users. And there's a lot that we can do in that space to create better digital experiences for those folks.
So that feels like a great transition to talk about something that I'm recently familiar with, which is the Discover Financial. We call this the Accessibility Theme Builder. I know I recently partook. That's the past tense, partake, right? In the accessibility, the Thenos Accessibility Hackathon, which was really cool because I got to like dive in and start looking at the code and discover a little bit what is this open source project from Discover Financial, which I think we just call the Accessibility Theme Builder. What is the Accessibility Theme Builder, Elise?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for asking. So basically what we did is we took a look at sort of the design to development to deployment life cycle, and we identified a lot of pain points that were happening along the way. And then we sort of used design thinking to try and apply innovation to figure out, could we rethink the way we handle accessibility and build digital experiences? So what we did is, like I was mentioning before, where a lot of accessibility needs are identified sort of at the end of the life cycle, we sort of thought, well, what if we applied the idea of building atomic design systems and we combined that with accessibility guidelines so that out the gate, the atoms and the molecules, which lay the foundation for your design system, are in themselves accessible. And then we make sure that those are applied in context to the background and the environment that those components are then used in to make sure that every experience is accessible. And then we also took a look at saying, well, what if not only we could create components and a component library that's accessible, but we actually allowed the end user to adjust settings so that they could say, hey, I'm dyslexic. And what we could do is we could apply some design system updates to their design, the design language being applied to their interface, to perhaps like introduce a dyslexic font instead of, the fonts that we have, making it easier for dyslexics to read, and increasing line height, which makes it more consumable for somebody with dyslexia, but also increasing color contrast. We also took a look at saying, well, we don't want to diminish or remove, motion from all of our experiences for everybody if there's a reason for those, those animations to be there and they add value. But for people who have motion sensitivity, perhaps we could allow them that ability to remove it. And then we also looked into color blindness. Now, the funny thing about the color blindness in terms of interfaces is, the reason we have the contrast requirements for that exist by WCAG is so that if you are colorblind, you can still see things accurately. But when you really apply or replicate what it is to be colorblind, there's actually 7 or 8 different types of color blindness. But when you apply sort of a filter to demonstrate what it's like to be colorblind, suddenly a lot of the color contrast issues that you had sort of been working around get thrown out the window when the colors that they see come into play, right? So we wanted to reimagine what we could do or re-explore what we could do for people with color blindness in order to create a better experience. So these are some of the things that we're doing with the Accessibility Theme Builder.
I love the way that it worked. I've done a lot of work around design systems, and I love the fact you're building this theme. It was component orientated, kind of atomic design built in from the beginning. And in the end, you would either generate like a CSS theme or a JSON theme that you could then consume in whatever tool fit your development environment. So I really love the way that worked. And the thing that really struck me about it, like you're talking about, was that you could add these different layers, maybe that's the wrong word, or modes, depending on the challenge of the person that we're trying to target with our accessibility needs, target those different people. I love the way that it would, kind of categorize those. Okay, here's somebody with color blindness, or a different challenge around accessibility. So cool, and really baking that in from the beginning. I love that we could build a theme out of that. It was a super cool experience to be involved in that.
Yeah, and to your point, though, I just want to add one thing, if it's okay, Cody. One of the things that we did observe happening was sort of that breakdown between the design handoff and the development. Developing and producing. As I mentioned before, as a designer, you often come in and you see there's a discrepancy between what you delivered and what they deliver. And this actually removes that, because what we do is we use the atomic system that you provided. And like you said, we help you render a design library in Figma, and then render a React component library using the exported CSS and JSON. And they're completely aligned, right? Which removes that friction. But also, we imagine that this could be extended, for example, into PowerPoint or into an email system, or even allow you to say, hey, can I get my physical bill sent to me in these dyslexic fonts and in these colors? So we're looking at lots of ways we can extend this.
Wow, I love the big vision around that. Like I said, I've done a lot of work in design systems. And I had a really kind of real tunnel vision view to that. But that's just really expansive. Wow, so cool. So I mentioned it's an open source project, and I'm curious if folks wanted to come and get involved. How would they go about doing that?
Well, one of the interesting, takes we took on this open source project is that we wanted to both open this up to UX designers as well as engineers. Generally people think of open source as being strictly engineer focused, but we think magic really happens at the intersection of design and engineering, and especially when you combine those with accessibility. So we wanted to really open it up to everyone to get engaged. So you can actually engage with the A11Y theme builder. You can go to GitHub and search for that and find the project and find out how to contribute it. You can contribute, Figma designs, wireframes, but you can also, contribute code and concepts to the theme builder as well.
Oh, I love that. Now, if I was like an influencer, I'd be like, "Here's the link," but I'm not. So I'll put a link in the I'll put a link in the notes to this video when it's on YouTube, so people can go and check it out, because it's such a cool project. And I think one of the things you were pointing out that I always emphasize, or one of the questions I often get when I talk about open source when I go to conferences, I love talking about open source, is people are a little bit shy to get involved, or they feel like they don't have enough skill level, or maybe they don't have a big programming background in a certain programming language. And my experience around open source projects is they just love when you help.
Yeah, exactly.
You can come, and you don't have to be a programmer. You could help write docs, or you could do design work, like you're talking about this bridge between designers and developers. So I just love giving that little reminder. Any skill level, any background,
Exactly.
getting involved is super cool and super helpful.
Yeah, and not only that, but it's a global thing, right? Accessibility is a global need, so we actually, during our hackathon where we had the open source hackathon that we had people from 28 different countries contributing, which is absolutely amazing, right? So
Yeah.
yeah. So, and we also had people from all different skill levels. So we had college students, we had entry level, mid level, expert, designers and engineers. And like you said, it's really open to everyone. And that's the beauty of open source, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. I know somebody who placed third place.
Whoa.
My team, you might can't take all the credit for that.
And we were so happy.
So such a cool experience.
Yeah. Well, we had a lot of amazing contributions. It was so wonderful to see so many people thinking about or reimagining accessibility, right? And what we can do and how we can push it to the next level rather than just perpetually trying to hit the minimum. So it was really amazing. The engagement was amazing. How inclusive it was amazing, and how global was really just fascinating.
Love that. Love all that. So I think that is like the perfect note to end this on. I know you and I talked a little bit before we got started. So just any last words on accessibility or the theme builder, or what would be your last word of advice to anyone watching this video?
Yeah, I would say, apply design thinking and innovation to this space. Don't be afraid to, whoever you are, get involved, have your voice heard. We're just sort of picking at this issue, and I think it could become really powerful and life changing for so many people. Accessibility is something. If you can't relate to it now, accessibility is sort of the great equalizer as we all get older. If we're fortunate to live to be old, we all will encounter cognitive, visual, hearing, and mobility issues, right? So, I think it's really important to understand the barriers that exist out there and the power that technology has to really make a difference in the lives of people with accessibility needs. So I really just encourage everyone to just reimagine accessibility and to get involved.
Wow, that's what a perfect last last word. I completely agree with everything you said. I love the way you pointed out, like we're all going to be there, whether we live that way today. We're all going to be there at some point.
Exactly. And I will also say this one last thing I do want to say is that everybody who has an accessibility need, anybody with a disability, they're paired with amazing abilities. So that's why it's so important that we give these people the opportunity to be the best versions of themselves and to share their gifts with the world.
Oh, love that. Thank you so much, Lise, for being here. Thanks for being in this fireside. I wish I had a fireplace to.
Awesome. Well, I so enjoyed. Yeah, so enjoyed it. Thank you for inviting me to talk about the subject that I'm very passionate about.
And I'll just remind everybody, I'll put some links when we post this video where you can get involved in Accessibility Theme Builder and where you can find out more about these and all these amazing things happening around accessibility. Great. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
All right. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Come on, Lise, you got to do one or two of these with me.
Okay.
Just end up doing this at the end.
What am I doing in that video?
There it is. That's how it's done, Lise.
Yeah, fireworks instead of fireside,